Hey there, crafty friends. It's Tina here, the Scrappin' Rabbit, and I have a fun project share for you today. Today I'm going to be making a card using the adorable Mama Elephant My Pet Puppy stamps, and I'm going to use a die from their Sweet Feline die set. And I have some links to where you can get these products in the description box below. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ink up this background. I was really feeling the fall today, even though it's in the 90s here in Southern California. This first color in the mini distress ink cube that I'm going to start working with is the Abandoned Coral. And I just use my sponge daubers, even though I know I'm going to go for a light blend. Sometimes I'll use my little soft brushes when I want to go super light. But my daubers work just great, and I'm using some Bristle Smooth cardstock for this layer, and I'm going to go over the top third portion of it with the Abandoned Coral, and I'm just going to use a very light touch onto the paper so that I can get a nice smooth blend. The next color in is the Spiced Marmalade, and I'm going to start from the side going across and then just blend out with where it meets the Abandoned Coral. And then I'll go back in with the Abandoned Coral to blend that top part out. Again, using a slight touch and just smoothing that color across the paper. The last color is the Scattered Straw, and that really brings that whole blend together. And I'm just having a hard time getting a grip there. I like to use a Post-it so that I don't get the oils from my fingers on the paper. And that helps because sometimes it'll leave a little bit of a mark and you don't want that. Now I'm just going to go blend over where the colors meet again so that I can get a nice seamless and soft blend. And I know that the bottom of my card I'm going to have some grass, so I'm not going to worry about blending to the bottom. But there's my finished blend, and I'm really happy with how that turned out. Now this little strip of grass was cut from the My Favorite Things Grassy Hills die. And I'm going to use two different greens. I'm going to use the Shabby Shutters and the Bundled Sage to blend out the grass. And so I started with the light one there on the top, and then I'm going to come in on the bottom. I did double die cut it. So I cut out the Grassy Hills, and then I cut it out using the same background die from the Sweet Feline set. Once I get a nice little soft blend, then I know I can go ahead and adhere that to my card. This is a little small strip. I could have distressed first and then die cut, but as I was creating the card I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do, so it just kind of came along this way. So now that I have the grass all colored in, to add a little bit of detail, I'm going to get a little cup of water and my paintbrush because I just love how the Distress inks react to the water. And it's not so much a reaction, but I can lift some of that color off, and I really love the way that it looks. Once I lift off some of that color, it gives that nice little touch. And then now I can go in with some ink splatters to really add more to that background panel. So there you go. That's how that looks when you get that water down, and I just love that. So now I'm going to use a little bit of Distress ink there. I think was that the peeled paint? That's the peeled paint. And then that gives some nice little dark contrasting flecks onto the grass, and I love just how that looks. Very easy, very quick to do. For the background panel, I'm going to use a Spectrum Noir metallic pen, and this one has like a coppery gold color, and I felt like that was just perfect for a fall background. It's amazing what these little specks will do for your background. It just adds so much. Now I'm going to stamp my characters, and for those of you who watch my channel regularly, you know that I love to do some embossing. So I'm going to use some VersaFine black ink along with some clear embossing powder. Now I tend to like to double stamp everything just so that it's nice and wet and it really picks up the powder good. You really want all the parts of the ink to be covered with the powder. You don't want any of that ink exposed, especially if you're going to be using alcohol markers. It's not ideal to color Copics with the embossing. If you spend too much time coloring on the lines, you can get it smeared with your Copic markers. But if you're coloring within the lines, it tends to go pretty well, and that's what I do. Once I heat up my gun for a few seconds, I'm going to go ahead and melt that powder, and that image just pops. I love the way that that looks. So I chose those 3 puppies for my project, but now I wanted to do a little something different. So I'm going to stamp that little Chihuahua onto a Post-it note. I'm going to cut out the bottom part and use that as a mask. I found this little trunk of a little stump of a tree from this stamp set here. I think it's called Pix's Favorites. And I'm going to use that little stump to have the Chihuahua perched on top of there. I think that that'll be so cute. So masking off that Chihuahua allows me to stamp right over him, and then it have the appearance of him sitting right in the center of that little stump. So once I have that stamped, I'll go ahead and add the embossing powder again and get that heating tool warmed up and melt that powder. I went ahead and started coloring without turning the camera on, so I apologize. That little guy there, I wanted him to look like a little Boston, and so I drew in, using some of my tonal grays, the lines to color him up. For the little Doxy there, I'm going to separate some of the colors there, so I'm just kind of sketching in the lines where I think that they would go with the dark color there, the E49. I know I want him to be a two-tone little dachshund with the darker colors, and that can be a little tricky sometimes with the eyes, because it might be a little hard for the eyes to show through, so you have to be careful about putting down too much color. So then with the E47, I'm going to go ahead and draw some of that fur in there, and then the light color there is the E25, and that kind of gives him a dark brownish reddish type of a coat. And then with the E17, I'm going to go in there to fill in some of those contrasting areas on his face and his front area, and then the little paws. Once I get that done, I'm going to go ahead and add some more coloring to those layers to get a nice deep rich color. I wanted to have more contrast, so I'm going in with the E79 to help make some of that color pop. It's harder when you're using the darker colors. If you're going really dark to super light, you can really see that contrast well. Maybe the next time I color him up, I might use maybe some of the tonal grays for my darker color to contrast. I'll have to play around with it, but this is the first time coloring him up, and I'm really happy with how he turned out. I think he's adorable. Just to add a little bit of pop, I'm going to take a white gel pen to add some little white specks to their eyes and then to the tips of their noses. For the trunks, I'm going to use my E40s, going in with the E47, and then blend that out with the E44, and then again with the I believe the E42 is what I used next. And I'm just kind of drawing in some of the lines. It's the E43 that I'm going to blend that front side of the log with. And I'm just kind of keeping the color lightest in the center and bringing that color from the outside towards the center. The E42 is going to be for the top part where it's lighter, and then I'll blend that out with the E41 and the E40, and then I'll add some shadows in there again with the E42 underneath the little pup. And I just love him. He is just super duper adorable. For the puppy himself, I'm going to use my E50s, beginning with the E53. And I'm going to just sketch around with that second to darkest color, then go in with my darker color, the E55, and figure out how I want to do the lines for the color. My light color there is the E51, and I'm going to blend it towards the center of his face, leaving kind of like a white strip around the front of his head as well as the front of his body. I'm going to go in there with a second coat of color, deepening those shadows out with the E55. I'm really happy with how the Chihuahua turned out. I've seen many with his coloring in my time. So that is the little puppy. Now to get his ears in, I like to use the R30 for the inside of the ears, and I just kind of give it a little bit of flex in there, and then I'm going to blend it out with the E50s, and that gives it a nice muted pinkish tone. Now the white areas in the front, I'm just going to use my cool grays to kind of add a little bit in there to give it a little bit more depth. And so I'm kind of concentrating more on the left side to give it that shadow. Now these little sentiments I stamped and embossed onto these sentiment bubbles from the Mama Elephant. They're slim card dies. And now I'm just going to blend out the edges using this vintage photo. I felt like it looked a little bit too stark white otherwise. Now that I have all the elements for my card, I'm going to go ahead and use some liquid glue to glue it together. I love the way that that grass looks on that background panel. I'm going to go ahead and glue it to the front of an A2 sized card. And then once I have that done, I do like to take this bone folder to just kind of press down on that liquid glue so that it doesn't dry with any lumps behind it. Now I'm just figuring out the placement, and I'm going to pop up my little doggies there as well as the sentiments with some double-sided foam tape. Peeling off the backers can take a little bit of time, but I do like to add a couple drops of glue on there just for extra adhesion. I just don't know how those foam tapes adhesive stands over time, so I do like to reinforce it. I have these little doodle bug hearts from my stash, and I knew I wanted to add them somewhere onto the cards, so I think I'm going to go ahead and plop them onto my speech bubbles. And that red really coordinates with that abandoned coral on the background panel. And again, adding a little bit of liquid adhesive just for extra durability to make sure it survives the trip through the mail. And then once I figure out where to put that last heart, I'll go ahead and add another drop of glue there and adhere it to my little speech bubble. So that is pretty much it. That is pretty much my card. And I was really missing people, and so I thought the sentiments really added to the state of affairs. So that is it. Thank you guys so much for stopping by my channel. I really do appreciate it. Here are some other videos if you would like to go ahead and check them out. These products, a lot of them can be found at the Butterfly Reflections Ink shop, and like I said, the links are in the description box below. Thanks again, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Until next time, happy crafting. Bye for now.